Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Horgan. I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Pioneer Institute and Pioneer Public Interest Law Center. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are new to Pioneer, our mission is to empower our citizens with practical and innovative solutions to help provide the best education possible for our kids, to ensure that all citizens have access to affordable and transformational healthcare, and to promote public policies that ensure the Commonwealth is a place where our residents have every reason to stay because of the state is economically competitive, local businesses are able to offer plentiful jobs, and housing is affordable. We achieve these goals through a tireless commitment to evidence-based research, sharing educational content, and a steadfast belief that the solutions we are all looking for will be found at the state and local level and not in Washington, D.C. And while we live in a society that continues to be driven by clickbait headlines and opinions rather than facts, we wholeheartedly believe that individuals will make the best choices for themselves, their families, their businesses, and communities, as long as they're provided with thoughtful and readily understood analysis. This practical approach to solving problems is one of the reasons why I'm so excited for today's conversation on vocational technical education. Here in Massachusetts, our approach to Voc-Tech is really a model for the rest of the country, and one here at Pioneer that we will continue to champion. And with that, I'm so pleased to hand things off to Jamie Gass, our Director of Pioneer's Center for School Reform, to get things started today. Jamie?
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jamie Gass, Director of Pioneer Education. Welcome to our webinar, Western Massachusetts Voc-Tech Schools and Businesses. As someone who grew up in Western Massachusetts and still has deep connections to the Pioneer Valley, I'm particularly excited about today's program. Pioneer's 2022 book, Hands-on Achievement, Massachusetts National Model Vocational Technical Schools, made it clear our nation-leading Voc-Tech schools are the group of pre-existing schools that have made the most academic progress in the last 30 years of Massachusetts education reform. The Voc-Techs have done this while simultaneously preparing their students for careers as carpenters, plumbers, auto repair workers, medical technicians, in agriculture, and the life sciences, to name only a few examples. By embracing the accountability provisions of education reform, including academic quality, school-based autonomy, and working with employers to prepare their students for the workplace, the Bay State's Voc-Tech schools have delivered for the kids they serve and taken their workforce development performance to an entirely new level compared to other states. Truth be told, the urban Voc-Tech schools in Springfield and Worcester have been among the urban Voc-Tech schools that have become statewide leaders for their work. In my view, Central and Western Massachusetts Voc-Techs have much to teach the Boston Public Schools about fully supporting the meaningful reforms that the Voc-Tech community has so successfully achieved. As we're all competing in the global economy, it's pivotal that schools, businesses, and state policymakers are well coordinated for common educational and economic purposes. I know of no group of Massachusetts high schools that have done a better job of aligning their curricular, occupational, and educational offerings to the needs of the workplace than the Voc-Tech schools. Having schools that families and their students pick, course and shop offerings students choose, and building on long-standing relationships with local businesses and their employment expectations are the reasons why the Voc-Techs have high achievement, microscopic dropout rates, and long wait lists for admissions. For nearly 20 years, Pioneer has published research on the historic successes of the Bay State's education reforms and economic vitality. We produce these research papers, books, events, and webinars to remind policymakers, educators, and citizens alike why our state got to be number one in Voc-Tech education. Of course, much of this success has to do with the leadership within the Voc-Tech schools and local businesses themselves. Our webinar today brings together that vital relationship between Western Massachusetts Voc-Techs and local businesses. Knowledge of this topic is important for the entire Commonwealth to thrive, both economically and civically. With us this afternoon, we have Eric Duda, Superintendent of Pathfinder Regional Voc-Tech, David Ferreira, Communications Coordinator for the Mass Association of Vocational Administrators, Kyle Brenner, Superintendent of Bay Path Regional Vocational Technical High School, Ted Noonan, President of Noonan Energy Corporation, Michael Moriarty, Executive Director of OneHolyoke CDC and a member of the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Jim Brosnan, Superintendent of McCann Technical School. We're so pleased to begin with Eric Duda.
Thank you, Jamie. And thank you for hosting this webinar. I'm pleased to be a part of it. Couldn't be more excited to share some of the vocational technical education experiences we have here in the Commonwealth and specific to Western Mass. Some brief background about myself. I've worked this is my 17th year now with the Pathfinder Regional School District, better known as Pathfinder Tech now in our communities. I'm also a Voc-Tech grad of this school and a product of the 1990s, late 90s. And I was an electrical student then. And after graduating, I went on to my undergraduate work and later my graduate work and now seated in this position. After the 17-year period of both being a teacher and administrator at different levels, I feel a unique connection to career tech ed in the state. And I feel obligated to speak to the importance of it and the value of it whenever I can, especially in the role I'm in now. And I'm entering my 4th year as superintendent. Considering our audience, I want to give a little background on the model we have in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the regional vocational schools that are 26 of them that are situated throughout the state were put in place by some very forward-thinking people, largely back in after the 1940s, after World War II, in the 50s and 60s. And there's a lot of books and information now explaining how this model came about in the Commonwealth. But when the schools that are here now, the regional Voc-Techs, were built in the 60s and 70s, they were put in place to solve a workforce problem that was occurring and was continuing to evolve and trying to fill this now known as a skills gap, among many other reasons why they were put in place. But they were also strategically located so that hopefully there would be access for everybody in the Commonwealth to be able to attend one of these schools. And we have the 26 regional Voc-Tech schools, as well as some specific agricultural schools that are Voc-Tech in Massachusetts. The model, we refer to it in Massachusetts as the gold standard, and I think it's highly appropriate to say that. This model has only gotten better and better, especially in the last 2 decades in my experience. I personally can attest to the fact that when I was a student, it was a model of an education. And it was this perfect blend of academic learning with technical learning and a way to find the relevance, and then taking that relevance and able to engage in rigor because of it, because I found where everything connected. And that was what my experience is. And that's what I work to replicate, because I know it's the experience of many of the students now that are partaking in career tech ed in Massachusetts. The gold standard model also involves having a week about system, we call it, or week on, week off. So Monday through Friday, our students are engaged all day with their career tech teachers, working from the beginning of the day to the end of the day on the specific field they're in. And that's referred to as Chapter 74 education here. It's governed by that part of the Massachusetts laws. So this Chapter 74 model has the students engaged for the entire day, for the entire week. And then the opposite week, they're engaged in their academic offerings. We also offer all the same athletics and everything that a non-vocational school would offer. I mention that because there's some people on this webinar outside of Massachusetts. And as I travel throughout the country at go to 10 different conferences or speak in different occasions, it seems sometimes surprising that we do this the way we do it in Massachusetts, but then also offer things like music and art and sports and football, and it's all encompassing, and it's really pretty amazing. And sometimes I wonder if this is possibly the only model that should exist in education, because it seems to make sense for all, not just for some. But that might be a topic for another time or another webinar. As far as Western Massachusetts it's interesting if you look at a map and you see the state, and everybody's seen the kind of the picture with the Cape, and then you saw the western part of it, and everybody usually can see a star on the map where Boston's located. And if you look at a population map of the Commonwealth, you'll see obviously the population centered around Worcester and Boston and a few other key areas that are larger cities in that geographic part of the state. If you look at where Superintendent Brenner's school is, who's also one of the panelists today, you'll see there's kind of this line that divides the state somewhere right around there. It says Worcester County. And we have this whole eastern part of the state, and then we have this western part of the state. And the western part of the state, in some ways, can be viewed as a different state, depending on who you speak to. And I say that because if you speak to people from Western Mass, whether they work in Western Mass or live in Western Mass or both, they will talk about the uniqueness of the area, the challenges of the area, and the differences that we might experience opposed to anybody in the eastern part of the state. And if you occasionally speak to, again, people, especially educators from the eastern part of the state, I have found myself quite often that some of them not only aren't aware of some of the differences with the western part of the state, they haven't even experienced it because they haven't even traveled to the part of the state. So it's really an interesting situation. Now, we're located in Palmer, Western Mass, our school district is, and you have another panelist who's even a little further west. Speaking from a perspective of businesses in this area and how our students and our graduates connect to businesses, I think one of the major differences that needs to be considered, and we.
Jim, I am about to forward an email to you.
Sorry, I think we might have an extra. There we go. Thanks. One of the large differences, I think, in Western Massachusetts that we all have to really make sure we are alerted to regularly is the fact that a lot of the businesses in Western Mass are small businesses. And some of the state metrics say there are fewer than 25 employees, but in many cases, they're even smaller than that. And there might be only 2 or 3 total employees, or in some cases, there might be a business owner looking for just a single person to hire, and they're doing small scale jobs. We have cooperative education as an offering in Massachusetts through the career tech model that we have. And our students have an opportunity every other week, partway through their junior year and their senior year, if they're qualified, to work for a business owner or any business, doesn't have to be the owner, and partake in employment and get paid for that employment while they're doing training and learning more about their field of study, whether it's plumbing or electrical or automotive or whatever it may be. I think one of the unique parts to those placements in Western Mass is sometimes you'll have an owner of a business with only 1 or 2 employees taking on this additional employee every other week. And it's a big ask. And I think we need to remind ourselves sometimes when you're bringing 1 employee in and they're going to be like the second or third person, that can have a huge impact on a business. And if there's an Eastern difference, I would say that I noticed the most myself is that some of the businesses are much larger, and when there's 100 or 200 or even more employees and a business takes on a student or a graduate, it might not have quite the same effect or impact. So one of those differences, and that being a difference, and one of the differences that occurs with that, I think, is that we find that employers are more interested, and this is a big benefit, in investing resources into training and sort of broadening what the experience might be beyond a field that's specific to a field of study. And I think of like an electrical student right now off the top of my head that I'm have in my head, and this student works with a person who owns a company and it's the only employee they have. They've gone through 2 or 3 different employees over the years and weren't able to sustain keeping those employees, either because of training and gaps or the lack of time they had to invest in this employee. So it's unique. So I think it's an opportunity in the sense that a co-op student or a graduate in this area in Western Mass could work for an employer and get maybe a higher wage than they might expect and get opportunities to be trained more rapidly than they might think for a younger person, perhaps 18 years old. But then also there has to be a bit of a commitment, I think, from that person to also want to stay for the long haul, because it's a big ask, as I said. So I think it would work both ways. Not unique to Western Mass, we continuously hear from our employers the importance of professional skills and customer service relationships. That's a broad topic, I think, that we all need to focus on outside of the Commonwealth as well. But when you're looking at Western Mass and a small business, I think it's of critical importance that if an employee, whether it's a co-op student or a recent graduate, is with a customer, perhaps working on a residential electrical project, that interaction can kind of make or break that business in a big way, even more so than the actual work that's performed. and it needs to be on the forefront with what we do. Of course, other things like showing up to work on time and being reliable is of critical importance. So the next piece I want to speak about, again, a Western Mass specific item that you wouldn't necessarily have in the eastern part of the state, is transportation. And when I'm asked what one of the biggest challenges in this area is right now, that's usually my first answer when it comes to adult training we're offering, when it comes to career tech ed offerings when it comes to employment with some of our employers, is transportation. One of the things we've noticed post-COVID, and we're starting to gather more data on this now, is a lot of young adults don't seem to have the desire or the will, or for whatever other reason, have the ambition to get their license early on. And it's a bit of a roadblock when it comes to cooperative education placements if there isn't transportation available for a student. And in this area, there's no public transportation. So without having public transportation, without having the T or anything else, which is an eastern part of the state, we have to figure out a way to get the student to match to this employer. And then, of course, in many cases, not just go to a business every day, but go to a job site. So we had a student last year, and this is one example, but it's not an uncommon example. It's a plumbing student, and they were working for a small company, and the owner of the company lived in West Brookfield. This student would have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning and head to West Brookfield, meet the owner of the company. The student didn't have necessarily transportation that was reliable to go any great distance. They would meet in West Brookfield, which was about a 30-minute ride to this owner's home. Then the owner would transport this individual to a job site. And in this area, the jobs that are commercial aren't necessarily local. They're not within 10 or even 20 or 30 miles. So this company does a lot of work out in Lawrence, Mass, and they would drive an hour and a half or an hour and 40 minutes with this person would drive, this owner with the student, as well as other company vans and whatnot, out to Lawrence, where the urban area was, where a lot of work was able to be performed at a commercial level. So I think that transportation piece is key, and it ties in equally with where there might be more work, especially on a level that's beyond sort of a smaller scale work, if we don't have a lot of employees or a business that's hitting an urban area. So the transportation piece is not only somebody maybe attaining a driver's license, but on top of that, trying to figure out how we can connect a little more to the eastern part of the state and beyond that. There's a proposal that's constantly being spoken about in this area, in the Western Mass area, and people refer to it as the East-West Rail project. And the thought is that if we were able to connect public transportation to the eastern part of the state, students like career tech ed students, though that's not necessarily what's always talking about, but anyone that's trying to get any kind of employment in the eastern part of the state where there's more jobs available, different types of jobs and employment, could connect to this part of the state and could potentially take public transportation. That could be a game changer. There's interest at a federal level and state level in doing that. So that could really make a big difference for Western Mass. I think taking more initiative in trying to get young people driver's licenses in this area is also a piece that needs to be considered. And that could have a big impact as well on what employment's available and where. Here, sorry, I have a few notes. I mentioned some of the broad topics of Western Mass. I mentioned the career tech ed model piece, and I mentioned the professional skills piece and the relationship piece. I mentioned the transportation piece, but I also want to, when I speak of that, mention the importance of noticing where, when you have more rural areas like we do in Western Mass, there's farmland, there's reservoirs, there's a lot of geographic reasons why there isn't necessarily large industry. But I want to speak to the fact that there once was. And if you go back to the Industrial Revolution in that time period, we have a lot of old mill towns in this area that are still trying to find their way. And I think that's also important to acknowledge, because as we train students right now to be, again, plumbers, electricians, automotive people, whatever they may be, I think we need to make sure we're keeping on the forefront the fact that there's a lot of real estate available not only real estate that are buildings that could be converted, but open land as well in this area. And we need to pay attention to how that's going to impact in the next 5, 10, 20 years, the students that we're training today for employment. And we're starting to see a bit of that shift now. And some of it is with development in some of these mill buildings and maybe students being able to engage in that work, whether it's developing them into businesses or whether it's developing into residential uses. But it's something we need to, I think, really pay attention to and consider in the future. So those are all my remarks. I, at this time, would like to turn this over to David Ferreira.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. That was very, very well stated. There is a big difference between east of Worcester and west of Worcester, and I think you identified some of the unique challenges that you face out there, as does others on our panel. And we're excited today to have 4 members on the panel, and equally balanced between people in Voc-Tech Ed and the people we serve, people who are in industry and are looking for the workers that we're able to produce. And our first one up will be Kyle Brenner. Kyle is a superintendent director at Bay Path Regional Vocational Technical High School. And if you don't know where that is, he's over in Charlton, Mass. He has been around a while, and what you may not know is Kyle was at the forefront of the opening of the new Worcester Technical High School. And all of us know Worcester Tech grew from a city vocational school to a city star, to the point where Worcester Tech was the school of choice, and still is, of all of the high schools in Worcester. And Kyle was in the background during that period of time as an administrator. Sheila Harity was the principal at that time, and many accolades came to that school district, and many important people. In fact, I had the pleasure, along with Kyle, to be at the graduation of one of the graduating classes where the President of the United States, Barack Obama, was present, gave the keynote address, handed out all of the diplomas, and stayed to the very end when he was only supposed to speak. I will never forget that day, Kyle, and I'm sure you won't either. And Kyle, it's your turn to do a little speaking and give us our perspective, your perspective of Western Massachusetts, and also anything you feel would be appropriate to Worcester Tech. And the first question is, as mentioned, under the 1993 Education Reform Act, Voc-Techs have done historically well. Could you talk about a little more about the academics, the impact of MCAS, and particularly working with businesses and how they have improved occupational education preparation and the performance of your students?
Sure. Thank you, David. And thank you for the wonderful memory of that day. Right. That's certainly not a day anyone of our 300 students that year or anyone in the audience will forget. That was truly remarkable. And I was very fortunate to have been part of that growth and change at Worcester Technical High School, from being one of the first vocational schools in the state of Massachusetts. And we just reminisce that the building that we were in up until 2006 was the original building that we were in. And that growth and change was came about because of Ed Reform Act and the need to have some accountability in our academics as well as MCAS. A new building was spearheaded, and that was ready for us to enter into in 2006. But that's just the building. We needed to address what happened in that building. And we did it through owning our data. We dove deep into the data and the accountability data. And we did it without judgment. This is where we're at, and what do we need to do? So we looked at all that data. We picked the lowest hanging fruit. We reviewed what changes and modifications to our teaching and learning, had to be done for all of our students and would have the biggest impact for the greatest number of students on that. It came down to rigor. So we didn't have honor courses in our academics, and we added honor courses. That was the first step. So we raised that bar, and we asked the students to, reach that mark and get over it. We didn't just ask them, we put supports in place to help them. So we had study groups and, paraprofessionals in those. And we did ask them to jump higher, but we helped them to jump higher on all of those. From there, it was organic. Our students asked for more, and it was through our partnerships with business and industry. As we do in vocational education, any changes we look to implement, we bring in our stakeholders. And in Voc-Tech, those stakeholders are business and industry and institutions of higher education, as well as community members, parents, and students. And we ask them, what are you looking for in a new employee? Beyond effort and attitude, like Eric said, like we want somebody who's going to show up and somebody who wants to work. What else? What are the basic skills that you're looking for? Are there, industry recognized credentials that are achievable at the high school level, and what can we do? Our students then started asking for AP courses, advanced placement, and that I remember began with our allied health students who wanted to go into nursing schools upon graduation. They could leave and they were employable. They had their CNA, first aid, home health, CPR, and all of that. But, CNAs, it's not a livable wage. That's a stepping stone. So what do you want to do beyond that? You want to move on and become a nurse, PN or a registered nurse, BSN, and this and that. So AP courses really help us in that. And then from there, it was computer science. Our programming and web dev students, looked at the AP computer science and said, hey, we can do that and earn college credit or the ability to achieve college credit through the passing qualifying score on an AP exam. So it took a life of its own. So our job became, how do we provide those services? And we did that with working with our partners as well. What are the opportunities? What grants can we look for? What equipment do we need on that? So the more skills and credentials a student had equated to a higher starting salary or less time and money taking basic courses in college. So, looking at our academics and the MCAS exam, and the biggest impact, and we're translating that here now. I'm going into my 5th year now. So we really took that same approach, drilling down into our accountability and what we need to do. How do we get here and how can we do better for all of our students? And it was really looking at, skills, obviously, in their chosen trades. But every trade we have is scalable. I use allied health. You can go out and be a CNA, or you can become a practical nurse, or you can go on and become, a registered nurse and this. So giving the students the academics and the ability that they can be successful in college equates to career ready. Sometimes I think we should just get rid of college ready, and it should just be all students should be career ready. And if that career requires a 4-year degree or a doctorate or a master's, well, that's part of the process to get there. So when students leave vocational education, Perkins in the state, Chapter 74, look at successful placement as you're going into the world of work, you're joining one of our, elite military institutions, or you're going on to higher education in that field. So we can have an advanced manufacturer student going right into the world of work through and Eric talked about it, a lot of them get offers from their co-op positions to go to work right away. If they do desire to go on to higher education, a lot of those companies, along with the 401k and the health benefits, are providing educational benefits. And, to be successful, they have to be academically prepared to take those rigorous college level courses. So instituting rigor in all of our programs opens more doors to the students. So they have a key to 3 doors. It should be their choice. It shouldn't be, well, I can't go on because I'm not academically prepared. So it truly is about student choice and student opportunities on that.
Very well said, Kyle. In particular, raising the bar that was the mantra that got us from where we were, let's say in early 2000 to where we are today. It was about picking up the standards and providing the support for students to reach the bar and giving them a goal that was achievable, but beyond what historically was the expectation, if you will. Also, I liked your comment about career ready. It is about a career, and certain careers do require a college education. And if you don't have the skill set, you're probably never going to get that baccalaureate degree. So thank you for your insight. We really appreciate it. Moving on to our second panelist on a different question is Ted Noonan. I did not know Ted until earlier today, to be honest with you, but I knew of him. Eric Duda speaks very highly of him, and he has been a strong advocate for vocational technical education. His connection to Pathfinder is extremely strong, and we look forward to his comments from the business perspective. And the question we have for you, Ted, is pretty simple. Tell us about your business. What are your human capital needs? And particularly as it relates to Western Mass, and what can we do to help you and other employers train students to fill those jobs with the skill expectations that you might have?
Yeah, thank you, David. Thanks for that question, and thank Eric also for the opportunity to be here today. So Noonan Energy is a family-owned business in Western Mass, been serving the community since 1890. We sell fuel and also offer home services, serving customers throughout the Pioneer Valley. We actually sell a bioheat fuel, so a combination of traditional heating fuel blended with biodiesel, more environmentally friendly fuel for the future. We install heating and air conditioning systems, as well as mini splits and heat pumps, and perform electrical and plumbing work. So we look to the Voc-Tech schools for trained HVAC techs, plumbers, electricians, and more, needing drivers and mechanics also. So we have a great relationship with Pathfinder, with Putnam over the years, and some of the other local schools as well. So, honestly, as far as, what the schools can do, and I think maybe more of a partnership, work more collaboratively together, with companies to, talk to kids earlier on in school and high school, giving kids like a multitude of options on how to explore a potential career. Ride-arounds early in the shop process, selection of a potential trade, I think is so important. It's frustrating to see some kids, not know what they want to do, and I don't know if that's just a generational thing of kind of how, things have progressed over the years. There's not necessarily the drive or the desire, but certainly, giving them a multitude of options, makes a lot of sense. And hopefully something strikes them. That's what I always feel like. It's got to be something that they can, that hits them and they say, yeah, this is something I could really see myself doing in the future. So, we prefer many times to work with the younger kids and to train them, as opposed to hiring the seasoned guys that might not fit our culture. We're looking as much at personality and drive than talent, because with the right person, we have a great crew that can train the talent. Which is why we enjoy our relationships with the Voc schools. So, I think we're clearly at a crossroads. Maybe college is not for everyone, and we're always encouraging the state to re-examine the way that, we're educating students, especially with tech schools bursting at the seams, and certainly maybe a lot of kids being left behind. I come from a family of educators, so as I said, often I'm always the dumbest person in the room, but the reality of it is it can be refreshing to hear some of the discussions going on today and in the Voc-Tech level, to understand that we need these options for kids, and certainly I think it's great that we're moving that forward.
Yeah, getting back to Ted, to something you said about career education. Do you feel that career education should be prior to high school?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you say that because I was giving that a lot of thought as we were talking about it. My wife was an educator as well, and I was just speaking with her, last night about it briefly. And yeah, I mean, I love that. It's so hard to know when's right, right? I think that's 6th to 8th grade. I've got a 7th going on 8th grader right now, and I think it's so he's going to be a marine biologist, so I'm all set there. But I think it's so hard to understand, when they're ready to, really understand the idea that they can know what they want to do in life, and obviously that's going to change, and for everyone that's going to be different. So. But I do believe there's some value in that, exploring that possibility in maybe an 8th grade level. But certainly, because I know it's tough once you get into the trade in school, it's hard to then switch horses. So, I'm not the smartest guy to understand when that should be on the age gap, but I definitely think there's a place for it in that early on learning.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm in full agreement. They may not choose at a very young age, but at least they were exposed to the different opportunities, and that not everyone can pick a career at that age, but at least they've been exposed to them. And I think that's very significant. Thanks for your comments. I appreciate it. We're moving on now to Michael Moriarty. Michael, welcome to the table, the round table. And first of all, we want to thank you for your many years of service sitting on the board of elementary and secondary education here in Massachusetts, looking not only at the Voc-Tech schools, but all schools at all grade levels, K through 12. And I know that's a challenging task, and you've done a terrific job in doing that, to be sure. Michael, I have a question for you, partially around your profession. You direct the OneHolyoke CDC, and you're as well as being on the board. And what do you see, or tell us about the role that Western Massachusetts Voc-Techs play and businesses play in helping lead the region's economic development?
Well, nothing's more important than workforce development, and nothing's more challenging than trying to find the right people with an incoming workforce. So I think Voc-Tech has been, CTE education has been filling vital needs for a very, very long time. One of the great things about serving on a state board is you get to do a lot of school visits. And so I've had a chance to have a front row seat in a lot of places I otherwise probably never would have been. I'm certain at this point I've been to at least a dozen different vocational schools. I think one of the ways you can see how important it is for workforce training is the wide array of Chapter 74 programs that exist. Now, before I was on state board, I was on the Holyoke School Committee for 13 years. So we had oversight of a Voc-Tech school, Dean Tech here in Holyoke, which was struggling a great deal and was actually losing shops a great deal of the time, very much over academics. But what was better to see once I was able to go more around the state, and as years have gone by, I've been on the board for a long time now, is that there are great programs responsive all over the place. For instance, got to visit Minuteman Tech in Lexington, which has a theater program, not so much for performance, but for the back of the curtain technical work that goes on, which is thousands and thousands of jobs in Massachusetts, where you have to have an array of very specific skills. Then you go to Northampton, you find Smith Vocational and Agricultural. And it's not the only agricultural programming in Massachusetts, but we have unique programs that are responsive to specific areas. Now, OneHolyoke CDC. A lot of people think we may be running around in spacesuits and fighting germs and things like that. It's not the case. We're an affordable housing nonprofit. CDC stands for Community Development Corporations. You'll find organizations like ours very often in economically distressed neighborhoods, but in neighborhoods and cities all over the Commonwealth and all over the country. And so we have properties that we have to maintain. We have a workforce we need to deal with. One of the programs I discovered existed didn't even think of as an option, was an actual facilities management program that I observed at Madison Park Vocational School in Boston. A great idea, kind of an amalgamation of many of the more focused trades that prepare the worker, exactly the workers our field needs. I also love seeing certain kinds of programming. Westfield Tech just recently built a house, and that's not an unusual program for vocational schools. You can pull, again, a lot of the trade-oriented shops, the carpentry, the electricity, HVAC, and what have you, all together on a kind of a singularly focused project, and you end up with a product that can change somebody's life later on. There's a lot of discussion about accessory dwelling units, tiny houses, that sort of thing happening right now. I would say a trend to watch out for is as laws and zoning change and that housing needs starts to become more widely used, those are the perfect size program for a lot of Chapter 74 programs to be creating needed housing. And it's organizations exactly like ours that are sort of salivating, waiting for you to build them in your shops and put them on the back of the trailer and get them over to us so we can put them to work. So that's something that's not new. But as I think I'll speak to a little bit later, there's a very different mindset about, and a much more positive mindset about CDE and vocational education now than there was, say, 20, 30 years ago. And it's all to the good, and it's very helpful to those of us seeking to build our workforces.
Well said, Michael. Your comments about facilities management, that's a growing Chapter 74 program in the schools. There were not many of them before, but they've become much more popular now, and the opportunities for employment obviously have increased dramatically. And there are a lot of programs where a lot of our schools partner with Habitat for Humanity to construct houses as well, or with Veterans Association to create specialized housing for veterans. And it's a win-win situation because you get free labor. You still got to pay for the materials, but now you're getting free labor, and alternately, or just as important, the students are getting real life work experience. And they're proud. They're building pride in what they do and the quality of work, which are attributes of good employees when they get out there entirely. And the bigger picture for all of us, of course, is the housing crisis in Massachusetts is just off the chart. When you look at the numbers in terms of how short this Commonwealth is in affordable housing, and the price of higher end housing is just making the buyers be very limited who can afford those kind of prices. So those are issues we're also thinking about at the same time. Thanks, Mike. We'll come back to you in a minute.
Thank you.
Moving on now to Jim Brosnan. Jim, as you heard previously, is the superintendent of McCann Technical High School out at the end of the Mohawk Trail, just about, Jim. Jim and I go way back. We have a lot of historical perspective, if you would. But I would like to thank Jim, who is a longtime military veteran and a veteran of Iraq freedom, and thank him for his service. Thank you, Jim. Jim, your question is about McCann Tech. We'll make it easy for you. How's that? Because you've been there more than a couple of years, I believe, with all those majors that you have at McCann. The other interesting thing about McCann Tech, when it was originally built more than a few years ago, you had a TI, a Technical Institute, and a large number of adult full-time day students. And I believe you still have some of those adult daytime programs, which make you a minority in terms of the regional Voc-Techs across the Commonwealth. So in your comments, Jim, if you could tell us a little bit about adult training and retraining.
Certainly, I'd be glad to, David, and it's a pleasure. Yes, superintendent here at McCann for the past 29 years. It's my 53rd year in vocational education. And McCann is unique. And at the time, it was the very first regional district to be formed in the Commonwealth, followed by South Shore Tech. Those were the first two schools to open. And initially we were 7 towns, and in 2012, 2 more joined. So we're 9 towns in the northern corner of Massachusetts. And indeed, we're in the Vermont border and we're on the New York border. So right in that very end of Massachusetts. Pittsfield being the urban area, and that's where Taconic High School is. But we're the only 2 vocational programs in the entire Berkshire County. So one of the issues that we have is a number of students from the smaller towns will come, and to my previous comments of my previous colleagues, transportation is critical to where we're coming in to get students from the towns, get them out to their co-op employment. So we're always looking at that. Another issue we always have to grapple with in those small towns is broadband. It's not an issue that anybody in the East or Central Mass worries about, but in the rural communities that we have, many homes don't have that internet access that they really need in today's workforce. So we try and make up for that as much as we can within the schools themselves. McCann has post-secondaries. We have about 520 students in our 9, soon to be 10 high school vocational programs. And the soon to be is that our new HVAC program will be opening in a brand new building that's being finished right now to meet that growing demand. And there's no other training of that nature in Berkshire County. The post-secondary programs are the dental assisting, medical assisting, practical nursing. And that was set at the beginning of the opening of the school and serves well because it's a 1-year full-time program. That graduate is therefore in the workplace. So over a period of 4 years, you might have 10 or 12 students per year entering, and there's a constant movement of those graduates into the workforce. It takes care of retirements, takes care of expansions, and I think that's a very, very important part of it. And for us, in being in an older school like this in the small rural area, you've got to meet the nature of what the employment requests are in the community. If they need medical assistance and dental assistance, that's the task that we want to be able to provide them for. Great careers, terrific opportunities, very low costs, expenses for those students to go through those programs. Similarly, on our high school programs, we're also looking to make sure that we meet the expectations of what our local industries are. Niche manufacturing is part of the Berkshire mantra. Aerospace, medical device, Department of Defense, and subcontractors. A number of our manufacturing companies are all involved, and that's very high tech, very high stress, very highly trained people. They're very supportive, but it's a great opportunity for our students to participate in cooperative learning, come in, continue. I think a number of our colleagues have spoken this morning. We have a continuum. If you graduate from McCann, you may or may not continue directly. If you so choose to go to engineering school, that's terrific. But you'll come right back into the workforce here because there are a number of companies, because every company needs a different layer of support. They need the basic employee, then they need the next level of technician, then they move into the engineering. So what we in vocational education across the Commonwealth, and most especially here in Western Mass, offer all of those tiers so that we are the answer to the workforce needs of our local employers.
Terrific.
That's
Jim.
kind of, 53 years in vocational education. To my colleague, I started at Worcester Boys Trade, the 1908 building in 1971. So,
yeah, Jim has some deep roots back to Worcester for many years. And Jim, thank you for the comment, particularly around post-secondary. I think we forget how important LPN training, which I believe takes place in 13 of our schools?
There are 13, and there's just shy of 500 graduates a year. And we are the preponderance in terms of practical nurse nurses entering the workforce.
And
By far.
many of those end up being leaders in long-term care facilities in terms of shifts and that kind of thing. And that's crucial work with a population that's constantly expanding because of our generation.
It is, Dave, and I think it's one of the, we mentioned a number of times this afternoon. You know, if you have a CNA that now moves to the next level of training and has been working in that, the next career progression is the practical nursing. And then from the practical nursing, the next progression is to the registered nurse. So that career track of I started and I'm moving forward, there's always what's next for me and what's the next advantage. And I think we give an awful lot of people an opportunity that never would have had that opportunity. We give them their first start. Our post-secondary programs, you graduated from high school, I have a GED, you meet the requirements, it's Pell eligible, it's Title IV financial aid, and the tuition is $1,000, $1,500, very cheap. So that inexpensive piece gets somebody who otherwise would not have been able to enter the workforce with those skills. And then they can advance. Dental assistants to hygiene school, nursing assistants and CNAs to practical nursing or medical assisting. So what we're doing is opening up the career ladders to fill that entire, our health structure employers really need that level so that they can constantly be progressing and filling their vacancies.
So true, Jim, and thanks. The career ladder piece is a huge piece. College is not necessarily a direct result of high school graduation. It may come down later. And with today's technology, in particular, the digital world we live in, lifelong learning is crucial. So you need to know the fundamentals. We're going to swing around back to our good friend, Kyle Brenner. Kyle, at BayPath, you offer, I believe, 23 programs or so. It's tough to keep track when you get that many for students to choose from. Would you talk about some of these options and how they align with the region, your region's future workforce development?
Absolutely. Thanks, David. Much like my colleague Jim just said, we work with local industry and they really drive what we're offering. We work with workforce development, mass hire. We use the blueprint. We see what the labor market indices are for each one of them. Each one of their current, we have 22 now, 22 trades, hoping to go back to 23 with the addition of a new program that I'll talk about in just a little bit. But each one of our 22 programs, we use Perkins, indices, and it's the comprehensive local needs assessment. So each one of our programs, we look at all the benchmarks we need to meet on that. So we're looking at job placements, we're looking at the labor market, is it sustainable? How many of our graduates are going right into that world of work, and how many are achieving industry recognized credentials on those? So I talked about each one of the programs as a program advisory committee that's made up of business, industry, higher education, and community members. They meet minimum twice a year. They come together. We look at each one of our programs. We look at the viability of it. How many students are on co-op, how many are graduating, how many going on for higher education in that field. They look at more importantly, they look at our curriculum and they look at the skills that the students are achieving. They look at the industry recognized credentials and they look at our shops and keep us current. All of our teachers in the trades come from industry. They have industry, they're experts in their field. They're master electricians, construction supervisor licensed, registered nurses and so forth. They're only as good as the last time they were in the real workforce. So the industry comes in and keeps us current on the latest and greatest trends and skills as well as material. And they challenge us and they help us with looking at grants, and the state has been phenomenal with the capital skills grant, so we can modernize our labs and get the new equipment that's needed on that and provide the opportunities for the students. A prime example, two prime examples, the latest program that we added when I first came on was born out of a partnership with a local nonprofit. Through our construction trades, we were helping that nonprofit maintain some of their facilities. It's a Second Chance Animal Services. So they had an adoption center in North Brookfield, one of our 10 serving communities. We would go out and do some repairs out there and some work on that. They intimated with us the dire need for, workforce and veterinary services, from veterinary assistants to vet techs, all the way up to veterinary doctors. So Dare to Dream, they said, we're going to open a new program, a new hospital in Southbridge, one of our other towns. So we partnered up with them and we helped them convert a former church into a state-of-the-art animal hospital on that. Part of that building includes our shop. So we're at capacity at our current location. There's not a whole lot of, unfortunately, not a whole lot of desire to throw money towards us to expand what we're doing and take a lot of kids off the wait list that we all experience. So it was an opportunity to put our shop downstairs. Our students learn there and they go upstairs and they work right alongside, Jim talked about that tier, from veterinary assistants, from receptionists, all the way up to doctors of veterinary medicine. They get exposed to that entire career ladder, and they look at the opportunities, and more importantly, they get hands-on experience with live animals. And they get to, leave there. Just this year, we graduated our first class out of veterinary assistant with the assistance of the Second Chance Animal Services in Southbridge. Every one of those students passed on their first try the National Veterinary Assistant exam, and they're leaving certified veterinary assistants, and they can go on that. And I'm sure all my colleagues here, and maybe even Ted, taking these students and seeing them, blossom and earn those jobs and move on is tremendous. I've got a local manufacturer who still retains, after 15 years, the first co-op person he hired. He's got at least 7 other students that he hired out of here. Kamasi Masonry, a local masonry, they just hosted our Mass Trowel Trades Association competition. They allowed us to use their facility, and right there we saw 4 employees that were former graduates of our masonry department here. So business keeps us going. The next step is we graduated our first class of the Career Technical Initiative. For anyone who knows, that's after hours, the state has invested, our towns have invested in state-of-the-art facilities and equipment. Right here, we depart at 2:30. That equipment goes dark and it remains idle until we start up at 7:30 the next morning. This is an opportunity to address workforce needs for adults, either underemployed or unemployed, free, 200 hours tuition free. They come in and earn an industry recognized credential. Part of that program required us to have 3 business partners to open up for each program that we did. So we've got local industry for HVAC, culinary, and advanced manufacturing. And we graduated our first class of 20 adults who, at that graduation, earned their certificates. And many of them were just glowing. Their families were there, and they were so proud, telling us, I'm already working at the country club in the kitchen. I've got a job with, XYZ HVAC services. So we're meeting the demand. Each one of those graduates is guaranteed an interview opportunity with one of those 3 partners in that program. We just applied and received. It's not public information. Our stakeholders know, for 3 new programs to add to that CTI initiative. And again, working with Mass Hire and our local legislators, we're located in an agricultural community and we don't have any agriculture. So the senator came, asked us to join his agricultural council. We met with farmers, we met with manufacturers and suppliers of agricultural equipment, and we just applied for a lab modernization to add diesel tech. So that's hopefully will be our 23rd program with a concentration in agricultural machinery. We partnered with a local over-the-road, nationally known, one of the top 10 freight line dealers in the nation for diesel tech. He gave us a letter of support. We've got a local national heavy equipment manufacturer who's on board to support this initiative, as well as some local farmers and local legislators who really want to see this get off the ground. So they drive what we do. That's what it's all about.
Kyle, that's very, very interesting, especially the last comments you made. And it's indicative of how we need each other. This is a symbiotic relationship between business and industry and Voc-Tech Ed. And that's what makes us different than a typical comprehensive high school. We're hooked into the community, and it's a two-way street. Both sides seem to be benefiting from it. The other thing you brought up was interesting is Chapter 74 itself, which is a statute that established Voc-Tech education and today still exists. And that statute is what requires us to have an advisory committee for every single vocational program every single school offers, and meet a minimum of twice a year. And that is such a benefit to our schools, our students, and hopefully our employers who can guide us in terms of new equipment, new technology, changing skill sets that students need, all of those very important kinds of things. And lastly, the CTI program, Career Technical Initiative, which was started by Governor Baker and is still supported by Governor Healy. This is the opportunity to turn the lights on in our schools at night when our communities can't necessarily come up with the cash to pay for that in their local budgets. This allows people to come to our schools at really almost no cost and be able to get a new career start or enhance their skills. And this is happening across the whole state, not only in Western Massachusetts. So a lot of good stuff going on there. Ted, we're going to roll back to you. And Ted, Noonan Energy, as you had mentioned, has been serving Western Mass a very long time. Of a fifth generation company now as president. Could you kind of describe what you're looking for in an ideal employee, the skills you hope they would have, and how the Commonwealth can help to make those employees available?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the question. I think for us, having a strong skill set and a good foundation in their trade, obviously, is huge and super important. But beyond that, good communication skills, loyal, hardworking, adaptable and versatile, willingness to listen and learn. I mean, if there's anything I get feedback from my guys, it's that there's nothing more rewarding than taking a co-op student and having them, really get into it and feel good about what they're doing and learn. And there's nothing more frustrating than the opposite, right? So the willingness to listen and learn is so important. And some of these things we can't teach, right? We can assist in developing certain skills, but clearly, and I'm constantly on the guys that, guys, we all started somewhere. I know it's easy to say that this generation is different than the last, and I'm sure they said it before that on us and everything else. So it's really just having some patience and understanding that, the kids today may learn a little different than us. What's funny to me is they blow their socks off when it comes to utilizing technology, right? So I always tell them, utilize them to help you with the technology piece, and they'll and then in vice versa, right? So it's kind of playing off each other, but and I think as important, looking to further enhance differentiated instruction based on skill level and aptitude, right? I mean, some clearly, kids learn at different rates, and some could be challenged more and progress faster. The more talented they are and knowledge they have, the better they are for us when they get to the field. So, I think that's why the co-op program is so important, that they get out in the field and they really can hit the ground running, with our staff and kind of understand, what's going on. So, and I think on other things, considering programs for truck driving, CDL training, good career, not sure what that would look like, but important, especially now that you need to go through driving school to get a CDL license. When I got my CDL, I was 17 and, I was around trucks all my life. I took a truck and went, and now it's $3,000 to $4,000 and a week's worth of work if you want a CDLB, and a month's worth of work if you want a CDLA. You know, and I don't know if that's a co-op with a driving school, but, you know, understand it's challenged by the age restriction as well. But this wouldn't necessarily be a program, but maybe an enhancement to some of the shops that, you know, require CDL licensed drivers. You know, certainly in a lot of the different shop programs, there may be companies that require CDL drivers in those, you know, jobs. So, you know, kudos to Pathfinder. It's a great professional skills class, very important for customer service, presentation, resume building, that kind of thing. You know, Kyle alluded to it, but so rewarding to see these kids reach their potential. You know, all the other distractions in their lives, anything that makes them feel good about themselves is so important to the development and well-being. I mean, having 3 boys between the ages of, you know, almost 17 to 10, you know, there's so many distractions that we all didn't have to deal with growing up, that anything that lifts them up and makes them feel good is a good thing. So, you know, I had a really refreshing discussion with the local state senator about what they can do to help with business. It's so important that we all work together in this. This is such a great collaboration, you know, between the business community, the schools, and the state. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't, you know, put a plug in for financial literacy in my role with a local bank. I'm also a big advocate of financial literacy program being a requirement to graduate high school. You know, it helps them with having a general business and financial sense, I believe, which assists them and their employers in the future, quite honestly. Anything we can do to educate them on financial, you know, goals in the application of that is huge. So that's where I see it.
Thanks, Ted. The financial literacy piece is interesting because many of our students in the trades will eventually own, or their desire at least, is to own their own company. So having a good understanding of finance is very important. The other thing is that there are certain skill sets that you cannot teach someone. They have to be practically learned, whether it's getting to work on time, whether it's being focused on your work and concentrating. You do that through repetition. And that's what happens in the shops at the younger grade levels. We're taking very young men and women and trying to focus them, and that they're working on a piece of equipment. That's their focus. It isn't their social media and being on the cell phone. It's about focused. How many times have we gone into a retail place and you can see the employee texting when they're supposed to be working? You can tell them over and over again, but that's a learned skill. And I'm very proud of the Voc-Tech school that provides a full day for consecutive days of working. And from when you get in to when you get out, you start the day ready to work with your uniform, your equipment, and you're working until the end of the day. And those help to make the kind of employee we like to send out to you. I got carried away there, Michael, sorry. Michael, one of the things I'm going to add to your conversation is this whole issue of how do we expand access? I know in Western Mass, the waiting list might not be quite as long, although we just heard from Charlton, Mass, that there's a pretty long waiting list there, but certainly in our gateway cities, there are huge waiting lists. And I'm sure the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education hears a lot about that. So if you could speak to that and this demand that certainly is taking place now, Michael, and any thoughts you have for how that expansion may take place.
Yeah, I'll tell you that admission to vocational technical schools was the hot issue in 2020, 2021. And I was almost grateful for it, because otherwise at the board level, all we were hearing about every day was COVID. So it was nice to have at least some other kind of policy to be thinking about.
We all felt that way about COVID.
Right. So it was, but it's a very difficult and thorny balancing act, because if you listen to administrators and you know, people with long experience in the field, you know, we got to a point where maybe historically, when we were all kids, kids who didn't have a lot of academic promise were steered into vocational school and it was devalued. And now we're in a situation where the exact opposite is true. And we're finding, even though we have very large numbers of kids coming out of 8th grade, struggling academically, not well prepared for high school at any level, that they're now finding themselves shut out of vocational technical opportunities. And there's some serious inequities there. But how do you manage a school with just a straight lottery and no sense of the outcomes you're seeking when you make a choice like vocational technical? So I don't think that policy argument ever really completely wrapped its head around all of the different competing values that were on the table. But the advocates continue to push hard, and there's talk of litigation and legislative remedies that would basically take away any sort of admissions criteria at all. But the thing is, there's choice on top of choice. Not only do you want to get into the building in the first place, but then what program are you going to get into? Holyoke years ago lost its HVAC program. You have to have 2 teachers in every shop. If you don't have enough students with the mathematic acumen to successfully complete an HVAC shop, you don't have enough kids, and you can't justify the 2 positions, and you see programs go away. So there is some place for making sure that the demands for all the different programs you offer are met. I don't think there's been nearly enough discussion about that. And it's important discussions to be had, because there's a similar set of folks advocating out there that want to see an expansion of available seats. But I just don't see as much activity, as much progress. And starting a Chapter 74 program, never mind an entire Voc-Tech school, that's an expensive, thorny, difficult proposition that, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of people trying to undertake right now, even though the need is right in front of our faces.
That's a good point, Michael. I think that there are opportunities for Chapter 74 programs to open within comprehensive high schools. That opportunity has existed forever. There's nothing that precludes that, other than the high standards and high demands and expensive equipment, and also the OSHA regulations you have to meet, and rightly so, to start some of, particularly the industrial programs. But there are other programs that can be started as well that are less expensive because they don't require real specialized equipment and high ceilings, for example, and ventilation systems and that kind of thing. I think there's a general feeling that Voc Ed should be available to every single student who has the ability to benefit and the interest to be there. And I think just because mom and dad want you to go to that school and you have no interest in going there is not a good starting point for a freshman entering any one of our schools. So there has to be some kind of measure of a student's desire to be there. And one of the benefits is to give them the opportunity, as I was talking earlier about, before they even get to 9th grade, these career opportunities to explore and start to begin, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? How many times do we have kids coming out of comprehensive high schools, very, very intelligent students, and you ask them, what are you doing after graduation? And the answer always is, I'm going to college. Oh, and what are you going to study? I don't know. I'll find out when I get there. Pretty expensive way of doing career education.
Right.
So I think we need to look into that part of it as well. And I know that most of the Voc-Tech, no, not most, all of the Voc-Tech community is looking and appreciate what the board has done so far in dealing with this admissions policy. And we look forward to working with you and the commissioner, the current commissioner, and trying to come up with reasonable changes that are beneficial, number one, to the kids. That's the bottom line. And I think we're back to my good friend, Jim Brosnan, maybe. Now, Jim, I have another question for you. In Berkshire County, could you talk about the relationship between the business community, organized labor, higher education, community colleges, blah, 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 blah. You've been out there a long time, and we know it's unique at the end of the Mohawk Trail, but
Absolutely. What I'll tell you,
Thank you.
you know, I keep little technology glitch here. Hold on. You can hear me.
we
I'll
can
keep
hear you
talking.
loud and clear.
All
That's
right.
the important thing.
There it goes. Berkshire County is one family. Mass College of Liberal Arts, Berkshire Community College, that's the higher ed piece. And Williams College, obviously, in Williamstown. Very close relationships, all of those schools with all of us in the secondary and pre-K. Business community, all of us have been, and I spoke about the long history that McCann has with business. Same thing with Taconic and Pittsfield. We're the source of the labor. We're also in all of the companies. There is a McCann grad, a Taconic grad, there's a BCC grad. So we have a family. And when we're on the Mass Hire boards, we're looking at each other. When we're on any other civic boards, we're looking at each other. When we're on task force, we're looking. And I'm on the Berkshire Innovation Center board, an initial partner of that organization in Pittsfield. A huge part of growing the Berkshire and bringing us all together. And the BIC is kind of that blending of the higher education, the manufacturers, the next generation of what we're going to do in terms of the technology and assisting in that manufacturing. So we have one close relationship where everybody helps each other, everybody shares. And I think that really has given us a unique aspect. We're rural, we're isolated, we get it, and we all work together. So there isn't the rivalries that you might see in other areas, and there isn't the crossovers of, I can't help that company because this company needs those employees. Everybody shares, and everybody is poignant to the fact of, let's not steal from each other, because if somebody hires away employees from a company and that deficit's one, eventually that's going to happen to that one. So there's a very strong business ethic afoot here that there isn't a lot of switching and moving back and forth. Recognition of the dignity of work, recognition of great jobs, great opportunities. And I really think there's a resurgence. I've been here long enough, nearly 30 years, to see a kind of quiet, steamy, large factories when GE owned Pittsfield. Now it's General Dynamics and those pieces, where you had the Milltown concepts, and now we're into a niche manufacturing, we're into a whole lot of other businesses. It's an upsurge, very, very positive. And like I said, every time I can go to a meeting, we're going to look at each other as colleagues. And then we usually say, what meeting are we at today? And that's the good part of it, because we all work together and work so closely. We can pick up the phone, talk to each other, see each other, Zoom each other, and get through. Even though it's a long county, it's a very good one, Dave.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all for your support. I'm going to turn it back over for some concluding remarks to Jamie Gass. Jamie?
So first of all, David, thank you, and thank all the panelists and Eric for your participation today. Really grateful. You can see why we're so enthusiastic about these schools. It really is, I have to say, the best story that's come out of education reform in the last 20, 30 years. And that's saying a lot, because there's a lot of that the Commonwealth has accomplished. But I just, note again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a book that outlines a lot of this. Dave Ferreira was one of the co-editors of it. It is Hands-on Achievement, Massachusetts National Model Vocational-Technical Schools. And you can find all of the information related to this webinar on our website, pioneerinstitute.org. But before I close, I just want to say, and next week, Pioneer invites you to join us for an informational luncheon on the MCAS graduation requirement on Wednesday, June 12th at noon, with Marty Walls, principal of Marty Walls and Associates, and Mary Tamer, Massachusetts Executive Director of Democrats for Education Reform, which they'll be leading the luncheon discussion and educating the public about how the MCAS exam and the graduation requirement related to it has been such an instrumental part of Massachusetts, both national and international achievement, and sort of the fight ahead to maintain that. So again, really grateful for everyone's participation, both the audience and the panelists and everyone. And hope you have a good weekend. Thanks.